Today we're going to be dealing with Numbers chapter 10. The entire chapter. This is a very important chapter in the whole scheme of things because it really helps us to understand how Israel was ordered, how they camped, how they broke camp, how they marched out, what they were, what they specialized in military-wise. And so it really gives us a good understanding and a good picture of Israel as an army, because when it says they left Egypt, the way the Hebrew words it is that God led his army out of Israel. They were slaves in Egypt, but once they left Egypt, they became soldiers. They became warriors. They became the Lord's army. So let's start with chapter 10, and it starts out with dealing with the trumpets. 2 silver trumpets. Now, these silver trumpets were communication devices for Israel, for all of the tribes, all of its leaders, and all of its members. It says, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Make 2 trumpets of hammered silver for yourself. They are for," so this is why you're to make them, this is the whole purpose they exist, "for summoning the community and having the camp set out." So they told the community when there was a meeting, when Moses or the Levites wanted to talk to everybody, or when the leaders wanted to talk to everybody. It told them when to start breaking camp and who was to go first and all this jazz. So it says, "Make 2 trumpets hammered silver for yourself. They are for summoning the community and having the camp set out. Whenever both are sounded," so both trumpets sounding simultaneously, "the whole community is gathered towards you at the entrance of the tent of meeting." So the 2 trumpets sounding a blast at the exact same time meant that the entire community of Israel was to meet before the tent of meeting, before the tabernacle, because Moses and or some of the leaders had something very important to relay, very important to say. Verse 4, "But if only one is sounded, the princes," that's the heads of the tribes of Israel, "are to gather towards you." So if it was just a long blast on one silver trumpet, it just meant that all the leaders were required to meet before the tent of meeting, because Moses and Aaron had something very important to say or discuss with the leaders, the tribal leaders and the elders of Israel. All right. So it says, "But if only one is sounded, the princes, the heads of the tribes of Israel, are to gather towards you. When you sound the trumpet the first time," so this is kind of a short blast, so to speak, the camp of those camped on the east is to set out." So who is camped out on the east? The east camp was the camp of Judah, which included Issachar and Zebulun, and we'll get into more detail regarding that here in a minute. So they're the first ones to break camp and to set out. So it says, verse 6, "When you sound the trumpet blast the second time, the camp of those camped on the south." Now, who was camped on the south? The ones that were camped on the south was the camp of Reuben, which included Gad and Simeon, and Reuben, of course. And so it says, "When you sound the trumpet blast the second time, the camp of those camped on the south are to set out. Short blasts will be the signal for their moving out." So it's kind of like Morse code. You have dots and dashes. Dots are beep, dashes are beep, right? So if it's 2 long blasts simultaneously, all of Israel's to gather together. If it's one singular blast, that's a long blast, only the leaders are to come. But if it's a short blast, beep, that means the camp is to break, and they're to get ready to pack up and move out. Verse 8, "The sons of Aaron will blow the trumpets." So they were in charge of the silver trumpets, blowing them and all that. "This is an eternal ordinance for you as well as for your generations to come. When you go to war in your own land against the enemy." So this is a future commandment because they're traveling right now. They are not in their own land. They are making their way to the promised land. So it says, "Whenever you go to war in your own land against the enemies who is hostile to you, you are to sound short blast of alarm." This would be, that would probably be similar to the sound you would hear from the silver trumpets, which means there's war. There's an enemy that's coming. Get ready. Get your shields, get your swords, your spears, your bows and arrows, your slings, all your weapons, and let's assemble for battle, and let's kick these bad guys' butts. That's what that means. And it says, when the trumpet is sounded like that, it not only signals Israel to come together for war, but it says in part B of verse 9, then you will be remembered before Adonai your God. Why will you be remembered? Because God needs an alarm clock of silver trumpets? No, they're being obedient in blowing the silver trumpets. Therefore, God says, I'm pleased with their obedience. I'm going to protect them. They're doing exactly as I told them to do, and I'm going to protect them from their enemy. I'm going to fight for them. So then you will be remembered before Adonai your God and be delivered from your enemies. Also at your days of rejoicing, which means the Leviticus 23 feasts of the Lord, not the feast of the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the feasts of the Lord. Also at your days of rejoicing, feasts and new moons. So it's not like they had a calendar they hung on their wall and said, okay, well, it's January 21st. No. They recognize the months by the phases of the moons. And so by the moon's phase, they would recognize that a new month was coming, but it wasn't official until they heard the silver trumpet blow. Then they would recognize that it was a new month. So that's what new moons mean. Also at your days of rejoicing, feast and new moons, you are to blow on the trumpets over your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. They will then be a reminder for you before Adonai your God. I am Adonai your God. Okay, here we go. We're getting ready to talk about the order of the march, the marching orders, how Israel broke camp. So it says in verse 11 of chapter 10 of Numbers, on the 20th day of the second month of the second year, the cloud, that is the glory cloud, the Shekinah, the physical manifest presence of God through this cloud, lifted from above the tabernacle of the testimony. Then Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, set out on their travels in the Sinai wilderness. The cloud came to rest in the wilderness of Paran, so they set out the first time by the mouth of Adonai by Moses' hand. So God told Moses, Moses told Israel, Israel did as they were told. Verse 14. So verses 14 through 16. The standard of the camp of the sons of Judah set out first by their divisions. Over them was Nachshon, son of Amminadab. Over the division of the tribe of the sons of Issachar was Nethanel, the son of Zorah. Over the division of the tribes of the sons of Zebulun was Eliab, son of Helion. So Judah's encampment, which included Issachar and Zebulun, who camped east behind Aaron, Moses, and the priest, which faced the tabernacle, broke camp and set out first. Judah's encampment banner was a lion, and Judah's tribal banner was a sky blue flag with a lion on it. They were basically the firstborn leaders, because Reuben forfeited his rights as firstborn because he slept with Jacob's concubine, or his handmaid, one of the secondary wives. And Simeon and Levi lost their privilege of firstborn because they teamed up together to deceive Shechem and wipe out all the Shechemites for raping their sister Dinah. And Levi ended up becoming the Levitical priests, and Shimon lost the rights of the firstborn. So again, Judah's tribal banner was sky blue flag with a lion on it, and they were the firstborn leaders. Issachar, its flag was blue and black with the sun and moon on it, because they were Torah scholars and they were calendar calculators. They kept track of the movements of the astral bodies, and they recorded and documented the months and all that kind of stuff. Zebulun's flag was white with a merchant's ship on it. They were merchants that supported Issachar's studies. So in verse 17 it says, then the tabernacle was disassembled, and the sons of Gershon and Merari, who were carrying it, set out. All right, so the Gershonites camped west and back of the tabernacle. They took down and set up all the tabernacle coverings and hangings, all the skins, the tent, basically. They had 2 covered wagons with 4 oxen to carry all their load. This according to Numbers chapter 3 and chapter 7. Merari, having 4 wagons and 8 oxen, were to carry the load of the beams and the bars, basically the frame of the tabernacle and all its hardware. They camped on the north side of the tabernacle. Now Judah's group, therefore, were the scouts and frontline Marines, if you will. and they protected the tabernacle itself, its frames, and its coverings. Now, Judah mostly defended with shields. They were basically hand-to-hand combat type of warriors. So Judah had shields, and Zebulun carried the spears. So, kind of like a Roman flaxen, if you will, where some of them held the shields together, and between the shields were the spears. That was kind of like Judah and Zebulun. So Judah was experts in hand-to-hand combat with shields, whereas Zebulun was experts in warfare with spears. Now, Issachar, they really weren't experts with really any weapons. I'm sure that they were trained in sword and shield and spear, etc. But they were more or less the spies. They were the scouts. They went ahead and scouted out the land and scouted out the road and the territory. They warned everybody if an enemy was coming or approaching or what the landscape was like, etc. So moving on to verses 18 through 21. Well, let's continue reading. Yeah, 18 through 21. The standard of the camp of Reuben then set out by their divisions. So you had the entire tabernacle with the coverings and frames was behind Judah. Judah and the camp of Judah, which included, as I said, Issachar and Zebulun, they protected the physical tabernacle itself and those Levites which took care, the Gershonites and the Merarites, which took care of the coverings and frames of the tabernacle. So behind them, it says in verse 18, the standard of the camp of Reuben then set out by their divisions. Over his division was Eleazar, the son of Shedor, and Shelumiel, the son of Zerushadai, was over the division of the tribe of the sons of Simeon. And over the division of the tribes of the sons of Gad was Eliasaph, the son of Deuel. Now, so, and then verse 21 says, then the Kohathites set out carrying the holy items, which was the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, the laver, the brazen altar, etc. The tabernacle was to be erected before their arrival. So that's why the Merarites and the Gershonites set out first, so they could set up the camp. And while the camp was being set up, the Kohathites were still on their way with the holy furnishings, and by the time they got to the camp, wherever it was going to be, the tabernacle was already set up, so they could just move the furnishings right on in. So, in verses 18 through 21, next, the camp of Reuben, whose encampment banner was that of the form of a man, and whose tribal flag was red with mandrakes on it, had Simeon, whose flag was green with the city of Shechem on it, and Gad, whose flag was gray with a tent on it representing a troop or an encampment. They were on the south side of the tabernacle, and they camped behind the Kohathites. Now, all three tribes of Reuben, of Simeon, and Gad, they were the fiercest of warriors. They were the Green Berets. They were the Airborne Rangers. They were the SEAL Team 6 of Israel, and they guarded and protected the Kohathites, who had no carts or oxen, and carried the holy furnishings, such as the Ark of the Covenant, on their shoulders. So Reuben, Simeon, and Gad was maybe considered light infantry, so to speak. They bore shields and swords, and that's mostly what they fought with. Now, moving on to verses 21 through 24, says, the standard of the camp of the sons of Ephraim set out next by their divisions. Over his division was Elishama, son of Ammihud, and over the division of the tribe of the sons of Manasseh was Gamliel, son of Pedahazor. Over the division of the tribe of the sons of Benjamin was Abaddon, son of Gideoni. So, behind the Kohathites were the encampment of Ephraim on the west, behind the Gershonites, who were behind the backside of the tabernacle. Ephraim's camp banner was an ox, and its tribal flag was a black flag with an ox on it. And under Ephraim was Manasseh, his brother, and as well as baby brother Benjamin. Now, Manasseh's flag was black with a mythical beast on it. We're not totally sure what it was, but possibly it was a Lamassu, which was the ancient throne guardian of the peoples of that day and time. Basically, it was a chimera of an ox, lion, an eagle, and a human mixed. And that represented the four living creatures that stood before the throne of God that we read about in Ezekiel and in Revelation. They were throne guardians. So Benjamin's flag was a multicolored flag with a wolf on it. Now, Ephraim and Manasseh were experts with a bow and arrow, whereas Benjamin was too, but he also excelled in the sling. So he was mostly known for his skills with, using a slingshot, basically. And it's not the kind of slingshot that we would know today. Basically, it was a long string with a pouch right in the middle that could hold a rock, and you just swung it around and let go of one end of the string, and it would propel the rock or whatever it was, which was the ammunition. It wasn't like the forked slingshot that we know of today. So moving on to verses 25 through 28, says, "The standard of the camp of the tribe of the sons of Dan, being the rear guard of all the camps, set out by their divisions. Over his division was Ahizor, son of Ammishaddai, and Pagiel, son of Ochran, was over the division of the tribes of the sons of Asher. Ahira, son of Enan, was over the division of the tribes of the sons of Naphtali. This is the order by which Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, by their divisions set out. Now bringing up the rear was the camp of Dan, which included Asher and Naphtali. They were north of the tabernacle, camped behind the Merarites. Dan's encampment banner was an eagle, and its tribal flag was sapphire in color with a snake on it. Asher's tribal flag was blue-green with an olive tree on it, and Naphtali's flag was pale red with a doe on it. They protected the rear from sneak attacks and picked off survivors of those that wanted to attack Israel from the front. Now, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali were considered heavy infantry. I'm sure they had shield and sword. I'm not sure what else they had. They may have had spears and javelins, and I'm not sure of what they were experts in as far as weapon-wise, but they were considered heavy infantry, and they brought up the rear. Now, notice that the 4 camp emblems make up the 4 living creatures found in Ezekiel and Revelation, because you have Judah, whose encampment banner was a lion, Reuben, a man, Ephraim, an ox, Dan, an eagle. And they were encamped, well, let me get the biblical directions here. They were encamped east, south, west, and north. And so they were all around. So basically the tabernacle was a representation of God's heavenly throne room in heaven. And so the tabernacle, which included the Ark of the Covenant, which represented God's throne on earth, and his presence resided between the 2 cherubim on the ark cover, the mercy seat. What do the 4 living creatures do in heaven around God's throne? They constantly revolve around the throne saying, Kadosh, 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 Adonai. Kadosh, 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 Yahweh, Zevaot. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts, right? Is the Lord God Almighty. So that's kind of what all the symbolism and representation is. Now, you notice that before we get to the camps of Israel, that Israel was separated from the tabernacle by the encampment of the Levites. You had Aaron, Moses, and the priests that were at the door of the tabernacle. You had the Kohathites on the south, the Gershonites on the west, and the Merarites on the north. And they helped Israel to keep a healthy, safe distance from the tabernacle and its furnishings, because if they encroached and gone past certain barriers, God would strike them dead. So the Gershonites, the Merarites, and the Kohathites, and Aaron and his sons were kind of like the LAPD. They were there to serve and to protect. They were to serve and to protect Israel. They served Israel as being a go-between and a mediator between them and God. And they also protected the Israelites from God pouring out his wrath on them because they breached certain boundaries. So hopefully this helped you understand the tribal encampments, the tribes and their military expertise, and the way that they marched, and broke camp and set up camp, and the way they traveled through the wilderness. And it may help you make more sense as you read about the different wanderings and the different encampments and what they encountered there, and how their order and their expertise all played a part and played a role in what happened in their journey from Egypt to Canaan, to the Promised Land. Guys, thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Go out there and have a great day. Shalom, and God bless.